The homeroom teacher of Class 1A, Aizawa, has been since day one, to say the least, an interesting character. From his constant state of fatigue to his sometimes irrational sternness when it comes to his students, there's always been something different about him. Something that leaves the curious lot of us to question, how did this hero with such a cold outer shell and kind soul come to be? In a world where everyone has their quirks, why did so many of us gravitate towards Eraserhead? In this video, we'll take a look at the life of Aizawa and the fatal injury that cut beyond the flesh and carved the man we know today. All information and connections made in this video can be found in the My Hero Academia Vigilante spin-off. All colored manga pages were done by us at Plot Armor. Hope you enjoyed the video. This is Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead Origin. Since his childhood, Aizawa only saw himself as an ordinary person, and an ordinary person, in his own words, only has so much power. As viewers, we've known since its introduction that Erasure is an elite level quirk. The ability to rid the enemy of a power they've always known, and most likely rely on, can quickly level the playing field, and is a power any hero team would love to possess. This, however, was not the view of Aizawa himself, nor was it that of his peers and teachers during his early years at UA. The man with one of the best quirks in the series saw himself as powerless. His lack of self-confidence, coupled with a lack of combat skills, at the time made this true. He was in a state where he was in fact powerless. This reality would begin to change little by little though in the summer of his second year at UA. During his early years at the school, Aizawa was closest with Yamada and Shirakumo, and the three would grow closer due to being the only ones in their class without a work study. Because of his quirk's usability in rescuing, battling, and entertaining, for Yamada, better known as Present Mike by most of us, there wasn't as much difficulty finding an agency, leaving Aizawa and Shirakumo, who were then picked up like strays thanks to an older student, Kayama, better known to all of us as Midnight. The Purple Revolution Agency, in addition to Midnight, added in Aizawa and Shirakumo. His Purple Highness, the pro hero that this agency was under, would take on the task of working the two into capable heroes that can one day go independent, a dream that the boys and also Midnight held. Early into Aizawa and Shirakumo's time with the Purple Revolution Agency, there was a robbery taking place on the 3rd floor of an office building on Golden Street in the Tasomiya ward. Midnight was the first hero on scene, followed by Shirakumo. Sadly though, their element of surprise quickly evaporated when, by using holes in his head similar to those on Majin Buu, the villain released a smokescreen and made his escape out the office window. And actually, his design is overall pretty reminiscent of Majin Buu. Could be a coincidence though, but considering the body part on his head, the open vest, and similar baggy pants, I doubt it. Onward with the story though, the villain escaped through the window, which Shirakumo was quickly ready to pursue before being stopped by Midnight. Showing her experience, she let Shirakumo know that they should help the hostages evacuate first, leaving Aizawa on the ground as the final defense to stop the villain. Still at this time using his signature carbon fiber capturing weapon that we're all familiar with, although less skillfully, Aizawa attempted to stop the villain. This failed miserably, and he was outsmarted by the villain, who cleverly used his smoke to distract Aizawa, while he then threw the safe that he'd just stolen moments earlier. If it weren't for his Purple Highness, this incident would have ended not just with the villain escaping, but possibly Aizawa dying. Midnight and Loud Cloud Shirakumo were praised for their good decision making and quick reaction time, and Eraserhead was scolded, not for letting the villain escape or a slow reaction time, but actually for his gloomy face and wearing his dress all over his sleeve. Comments that were justified by saying that heroes are supposed to give the gift of hope, a way of thinking that was likely popularized at the time by All Might's reign. While it might not seem like a big problem, it's true that Aizawa's gloominess and overall attitude could bring down others, but even more than that, they were bringing him down. Without a change in attitude, he would never meet his potential. Fast forwarding later, to address the literal issue that caused Aizawa to mess up during this encounter, Shirakumo would be needed. Shirakumo actually had goggles as a part of his hero costume, something he was quick to offer to Aizawa to protect his eyes in case they ran into the smoke villain again, and they did. This time however, things would go different. Aizawa was able to activate his quirk, stopping the smoke, and then showed growth by avoiding damage once the playing field was evened out, allowing Shirakumo to deal the final blow. This was no doubt a confidence booster, and things for a while would look up. The teamwork between him and Shirakumo increased. His vision of the future became more clear with growing discussions of starting an agency with Yamada and Shirakumo. Everything looked great, until a week later from these talks when his greatest injury was inflicted. An injury that makes the horrific USJ incident small. Within the Tasomi Award again came calls for backup. A villain had gone on a rampage. The first hero team on scene for backup was the Buster Union, a team that due to his work study included Yamada. The villain was giant, and with an enemy of that size, they thought it would be best to simply unleash the full might of all their quirks onto it at the same time, which is probably normally not a bad idea. Unfortunately for them though, this enemy, who we later found out is named Garvey, had a quirk named Stalk, which involves absorbing attacks and releasing them at any time, of course causing their plan to fail. And this was no small-time villain like the Majin Buu clone. His rap sheet included offenses like murder and property damage. At the time of all this, Loud Cloud and Eraserhead were on patrol in the neighborhood, playing around with a local class of nursery students. The students were familiar with the two, so it's safe to assume this neighborhood was either a regular patrol spot for the two or an area they lived close to. During this playful scene, we not only get a great smile out of Aizawa, but we hear Shirakumo encouraging him, reminding him that he can achieve anything if he puts his mind to it, whether that be his success in a fight, running a daycare, or even becoming a teacher. This moment of peace, however, would be cut short. Disaster was here. With a call from Midnight in panic telling them to evacuate the area, everything was forever changed. The villain had arrived sooner than expected, and while his record showed no history of being this destructive, unfortunately, he was now fully charged with attacks because of the earlier barrage from Buster Union. With so much power in his control now, the villain unleashed, blasting everything in sight. In an act of selflessness, Purple Highness charged in first, exclaiming that he's there to buy time for the backup to arrive. This was quickly shot down though by the villain using Present Mike's voice attack from earlier, sending Purple Highness flying into a building. With giant boulders falling everywhere and civilians still there to protect, the situation looked dire. In a commendable effort to protect the nursery children and their teacher from a falling boulder, Loud Cloud sent his clouds to catch the falling rubble, leaving himself defenseless as Aizawa watched him get hit in the head with a massive boulder. Like all of us probably would have in this situation, Aizawa ran to check on Shirakumo, but was quickly stopped once he remembered the children and their teacher were still in danger. Realizing that with his boss out for the count along with Shirakumo, it was now all in his hands. Dozens of thoughts rushed to his mind. What now? Decide, think, and many more, until he heard a voice besides his own. It was the voice of Shirakumo through his speaker on the ground cheering on. Aizawa, you got this. It was then he remembered that he couldn't afford to hesitate now, and jumped into the action. Various things were tried, delaying the explosives, attacking from above for the projectiles to be aimed upward instead of at the ground, and kicking the undeployed explosives upward to again minimize damage. These were all signs of great thinking, but it wasn't enough to stop this enemy. The body was huge. He was overwhelmed by size and power, leaving Eraserhead feeling like he had nothing. Then again came that voice.
You can do it, Shota. You're the only one that can protect everyone. I know for a fact that you're strong. You won't lose.
These encouraging words echoed from the speaker. Eraserhead again charged into action, this time doing damage, throwing rocks, dodging attacks, charging into the enemy, taking damage, but still fighting while words of encouragement continued to echo, until in one big finishing move, Eraserhead would defeat the villain, using his own blast to deal the final blow. In the aftermath, Aizawa was feeling good. He'd just beaten the odds and with the help of a good friend, took down a villain that a pro hero couldn't. The joy would be depleted though by the realization that there were no words of encouragement. The speaker was broken from the beginning. He had imagined it all. After this, Aizawa would see it, a covered, bloody scene that said enough. Throughout the fight, he was alone. His friend was already gone. The rain would pour on, while Yamada and Aizawa stood alone, grieving the loss of their close friend. 1 year later, things had changed drastically. Aizawa was more closer to the man we know today. His hand combat skills were excellent. His sleeping during daylight habit had begun. His facial hair had started to grow, and his goggles were now like the ones we know today. Above all else, he'd become more serious, more distant. His grades at UA remained above average, and his skills had come a long way from the start of his time at the school. He would, however, begin to only show interest in practical battle exercises. His teachers described it by saying that he'd become complacent in a weird way. It was at this time we would learn that his sleeping habits were a result of solo training during all hours of the night, sometimes at the UA gym and other times outside of school. It seems Aizawa's way of coping was through training and self-betterment, while for Yamada, while he was coping also, he went about it in a different way. When the time came to discuss career aspirations at UA, Aizawa listed starting his own agency as his aspiration, something unusual because UA students often work a few years under already established heroes for experience. To this point, Aizawa responded that he'll only specialize in anti-villain combat so that he could focus only on fighting and nothing else, and also making it clear that he's meant to be an underground, independent pro-hero. Post-graduation, Aizawa would do exactly what he planned, go independent and be an underground hero. From the page of various moments, we can gather that not only was he independent, but he was homeless and living out of a suitcase at least at a certain point. It was some time after this that he would meet the Crawler and the rest of the vigilante cast. It's hard to tell what exactly was going through Aizawa's mind at this time, or even if he was content with his life, but at the very least we know he was alone and doing what he had intended. Eraserhead would become a neighborhood hero in the location that the vigilante spin-off is based. Like he planned from the beginning, he was a hero that avoided public appearances and anything that seemed gimmicky. He wasn't loved like other heroes and was often seen as scary, likely because of the mysteriousness around him. In the neighborhood was a recycle shop that Eraser frequented as a part of his morning routine before patrolling. In his own words, stopping by there just put him in the right mood before starting his patrol, in addition to being a good spot to keep his ear to local black markets. And also, the two workers that were there make good coffee. He would visit this place so much that word around town was that it was an offshoot of his agency. Eraserhead would solve tons of local crimes and save a lot of people in town while interacting with the vigilante cast before he left. After hearing about Yamada and Midnight working at UA, and also finding out that there was a position available for him, Aizawa would still hesitate to make the move, until a moment that made everything clear. While at his usual spot, the cast of locals he often interacted with were all discussing turning their store into a cafe. And not just any cafe, but a cafe that would be cat themed, inspired by a stray cat they'd found. I think something about seeing this group come together and creating something fulfilled his earlier dreams of creating an agency with space for a stray cat that he bonded over with his friends. This moment was special for him and cleared the thoughts that were weighing on him, allowing him to suddenly announce that he's leaving town for what would later become his job at UA. At UA, Aizawa would go on to be a pretty strict teacher, with good intention though. On paper, he's expelled many students, but also he's re-enrolled them later after the fact. A bit extreme to warn someone of their behavior by expelling them? Yeah, maybe, but that's his style, and it's almost definitely a result of seeing his friend die. With that said, this is the end of the story. You guys know the rest. I hope you enjoyed this origin video. In the comments, let me know what you think about Aizawa's origin. If there are any characters you'd like to see covered on the channel, let us know that also. If you love My Hero Academia, be sure to subscribe to the channel Plot Armor for more great content. Until next time, I'm KJ. Have a great day. Goodbye.